If you're just joining us, welcome to another edition of Never Again Live. This is our Hanukkah edition. So everybody, we wish you a very happy tail end of Hanukkah. And as we know, the candle of Judaism cannot be burnt out, cannot be extinguished, no matter how hard people continue to try. And that's what our episode is about tonight, is the wrath of anti-Semitism on college campuses. So do join us and share us with all your friends and colleagues. Meir Weinstein as our host and me down here in the studio. Tonight's episode, as we mentioned, is going to focus on the increasing wrath of anti-Semitism on college campuses and how it's being endorsed by the administrations. And it's nothing new on campus. We can go back 20 years to Berkeley. One student who actually spoke with said that when she arrived at Berkeley, nothing could have prepared her for the viper's nest of anti-Semitic activity that she encountered. Again, remember, this is 2007.
In Palestine, the virulently anti-Semitic campus organization created by UC Berkeley professor Dr. Hatem Bazian. But you might not have heard about Bazian's other organization, American Muslims for Palestine, or AMP. AMP was founded in 2006 and has become one of the leading groups providing anti-Zionist training and education to students and anti-Israel activists. AMP's goal is the destruction of the State of Israel.
That's pretty much a summary of their mission. And we can look not only at Berkeley anymore, but we can look all over the country and over Canada. I mean, this is just recent occurrences. We're talking about July, September, this is October. This is all 2021. And it's happened in Michigan. It's happened at Duke University, the university.
The Rutgers professor is accused of posting anti-Semitic sentiments on social media, and he's been removed from his position as a director at the school. Michael Chikindas was a director of the Center for Digestive Health.
Remember, he's in the Center for Digestive Health. He's not in political science, in history, in religion, and yet he was inundating his classes, his students, with anti-Semitism.
Statements on Facebook. He has been barred from teaching courses and is required to take cultural sensitivity training courses. The university is also looking at additional disciplinary action through the faculty union. The Rutgers professor is accused of
Now, this is absolutely incredible. They called for the defunding of Hillel, as if Hillel is a Zionist organization, and even if it is, it deserves to be. And here's our campuses today. We do have some special guests who'll be joining us this evening. A little later, we'll have some commentary, some words, and some advice from Thane Rosenbaum. Thane's a distinguished professor, an attorney, an award-winning author, a columnist. He runs a Center of Life, Culture, and Society at Touro College, where he is a distinguished professor. And that's where he uses culture and the arts to dispel changes in society and what we can do as a group of humans, and how powerful the arts can be as a catalyst for social change. At Touro College, where he now is a professor, is a private Jewish university in New York City, founded in 1971. We're particularly excited to have back with us again this evening Christine Douglas Williams, and sometimes have trouble keeping up with the organizations she represents because she represents so many, and as soon as she speaks out for Zionism, she gets thrown off the board or gets fired or gets ridiculed. So she's a great person to talk about her personal experiences with anti-Semitism, even as a Christian Zionist. She's also an award-winning broadcast journalist, a regular writer for Jihad Watch, associate editor of Front Page Magazine, and from the Canadians for the Rule of Law. I'm not even sure if that still exists, but she can tell us all about that. And both Thane and Christine have books there, so get them online, Amazon.com. They're both wonderful. It's a good moment in history to remember that the world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. And that's why Israel Now is here, because we're not going to sit by and do nothing. We're going to make sure that we do the best we can to fight anti-Semitism. So join IsraelNow.ca online, watch our podcast, and we're going to turn it over to Meir, our host, momentarily.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you. I'm going to ask all our supporters and friends who are joining us, either on Facebook or on YouTube, if you could please share this, share the link with your different pages and groups that you're part of. We'll reach a lot more people, have a stronger effect. Tonight's a very important show, as every show is, and every single show is relevant to what's going on. Before every episode that we have, I always add a few words of the Parsha. That was the Torah portion that was read in every synagogue throughout the world. And the portion that we dealt with yesterday in the synagogue was Parshas Miketz. And it starts off, Vayehi Miketz. And what that means is that this was the end of an era, the beginning of a new era. And what was going on was that Joseph was sold into captivity by his brothers who were jealous of him. And there was a lot that happened. He was thrown into prison in Egypt by Pharaoh's wife under her direction. She false allegations, but that's what happened. Fast forward, he finally has an encounter with his brothers because there's a famine going on and everyone is coming to Egypt. And Joseph is there. He's made the second in command in Egypt because he interpreted the dreams of the Pharaoh properly. And so he's going to be eating with his brothers finally after many, many years. And it says that the Egyptians prepared food for Joseph and his brothers, but the Egyptians would not sit there with them. It says because since the Egyptians could not eat food with the Egyptians because it was disgusting to the Egyptians. The Egyptians actually hated the Jews back then. It goes back so many years. This anti-Semitism, this endemic. It's something that can't be explained. How did the Holocaust happen in Germany? How come they were getting along? Jews were getting along with Germans for many, many years before Hitler came to power, and it just happened. It's there. It's there throughout Europe. There's no excuse for it. It's there throughout the Islamic world, anti-Semitism. And we're very happy, fortunate that we're living at a time where there's the Abraham Accords, where there seems to be a little bit of hope going on right now. That there's a different wind, that in countries like Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, they're taking steps to eliminate anti-Semitism from their school curriculums. They were teaching it in their schools. Saudi Arabia was a leader, in fact, in teaching and promoting anti-Semitism. They're getting rid of it too. And Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates have adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. But we have major Islamic organizations here in Canada and in the United States that are fighting tooth and nail against the Jewish definition of anti-Semitism, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. They're preaching free Palestine, and when you look into it, that means the destruction of Israel. We have a lot of problems going on campus and in the public school, and it reaches right up to the top. And we're going to be talking about that. So we have Christina Douglas Williams with us. We're going to get into it, but there's an issue, two issues that we're going to focus on, and then we're going to talk about how it's from the top. And when we talk about from the top, from government institutions. So we have, for instance, a problem at University of Toronto that the Scarborough campus, the student union there, passed the motion. And now, because they're under a lot of attack and they're being exposed, they're trying to walk back on some of it. But their motion called for taking measures against Jewish organizations on campus, the Hillel on campus, and also prohibiting Jewish students from bringing kosher food to campus, unless they could prove that the kosher food manufacturer or restaurant that they got it from, whatever eatery that they got it from, has absolutely nothing to do with Israel. No support for Israel, that they're against it. 1 second, I got a lawyer calling that might want to be on the show. Michael Tepper. Michael, you're calling? We're on air. Are you trying to get on? Okay. Now, I don't normally take any calls, but he's been very involved with the TDSB issue right now. So what's going on campus is that it came to our attention that the student that leads the Scarborough Union on her social media, she says that she's very involved also with the Urban Alliance on race relations in Canada. And I looked into that, and another individual who's very involved with the Urban Alliance on race relations in Canada is Mohammed Hashim, who's actually the director right now of the Canadian Race Relations Committee. So after all of the exposure of the student union at University of Toronto, haven't heard a word from Mohammed Hashim on this issue, although there is an association, because she publicly says, the person who runs, the female who runs the student union at University of Toronto, she goes on that she's very involved with the Urban Alliance of Canada on race relations, and promotes anti-Semitism. This is anti-Semitism at the University of Toronto. Secondly, Toronto District School Board. Toronto District School Board, a Jewish trustee has brought it to the attention of Toronto District School Board that a teacher was promoting anti-Semitism, or wanted to promote and use the email of the TDSB, Toronto District School Board, to send out to their email list material that he would like introduced into the curriculum that supports the BDS. That also has links to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a terrorist organization recognized in Canada. Now, the TDSB set up an integrity commission, and the integrity commissioner hired a lawyer or some lawyers to act as an independent investigators on the email that this Jewish trustee sent out of concern. And they recommended to penalize her, the Jewish trustee, that when she brought it to the attention of TDSB that the material being suggested by the teacher supports the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the BDS and anti-Israel and is anti-Semitic, they considered her email to be Islamophobic, and they're recommending the TDSB takes action against her. Now, how does this happen? How does it happen? Well, we're going to get into how it happens. We have a video of a woman who is a director of care in the United States speaking at a conference about a week ago, American Muslims for Palestine, Zahra Balil. And this is something that we have to pay attention to. Listen to her words, and then I'm going to show you, I'm going to connect the dots, and I'm going to bring Christina on.
We need to pay attention to the Anti-Defamation League. We need to pay attention to the Jewish Federation. We need to pay attention to the Zionist synagogues. We need to pay attention to the Hillel chapters on our campuses, because just because they're your friend today doesn't mean that they have your back when it comes to human rights. So oppose the vehement fascists, but oppose the polite Zionists too. They are not your friends. They will not be there for you when you need them. They will take your friendship and throw your Palestinian brothers and sisters under the bus. Oh, you get along because you're all in Girl Scouts together? Talk to them about what is happening in Palestine and see how that conversation goes. And so when we think about Islamophobia and Zionism, let's be clear about the connections. There is no difference between domestic policy and foreign policy when it comes to our human rights. There is no difference between domestic policy and foreign policy when it comes to those who seek to target us. And by the way, you should be a monthly donor to American Muslims for Palestine. Build it into your budget and forget about it. Make it your monthly contribution, because you're contributing to the apartheid monthly. It is a part of your budget. You are paying your taxes, so you should be giving money to AMP monthly. No, list goes on. Know who is on your side. Build community with them. Because the next thing I'm going to tell you is to know your enemies. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. They are your enemies. There are organizations and infrastructures out there who are working to harm you. Make no mistake of it. They would sell you down the line if they could. And they very often do behind your back. I mean the Zionist organizations. I mean the foreign policy organizations who say they're not Zionists but want a two-state solution. I'm not a Palestinian myself, but it's my understanding that that is laughable. So know your enemies.
Now, we also have a meme of her with, and this is very important, this meme. And I'd like Christina to explain the person in the meme. So here we have Amira Al-Gawabi embracing her, embracing this person who just spout that hatred on that video. And Amir Al-Gawabi was with the Canadian Race Relations Agency. It's a crown corporation. It's a government agency. And when Zahra Belil says this garbage, and she has been saying it for years, I haven't heard a word from Amir Al-Gawabi to condemn this at all. I've heard silence. Christina, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Hearing these things, Meir, it's shocking. It shouldn't be, but it is. And I will go so far as to say that anybody listening to this kind of material, if it isn't jolting or shocking, you're not awake. You're not paying attention to what's going on. This doesn't just affect the Jewish people, although that is enough. It affects everybody. It is blatant, open discrimination. It is hate of the worst kind. And frankly, if you make it on websites like Memory or Palestinian Media Watch, you have something to really be ashamed about. Now, Meir mentioned Al-Gawabi. I am not going to make this about attacking her personally, because it doesn't start with her, nor does it stop with her. I will give information, though, that it's worth contemplating. She is now with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. That was an agency that I was fired from. And I want to correct something that was said earlier. No, I don't get fired from everywhere I go. Thankfully, it's one particular organization. And that, by the way, was by the Trudeau government. I was a governor and council appointee to that foundation, and I was appointed under the Stephen Harper government. What got me fired was writing about political Islam for Jihad Watch. And I also write, or used to write more, for the Gatestone Institute, where I once served on the board of governors as well. All we write about on Jihad Watch is the jihad, is political Islam. We highlight the truth about what is going on. Robert Spencer is the director there, and he has asked the question again and again, what is wrong with what is being said on Jihad Watch? Could you particularly identify where hate is being spewed? And nobody can. Now, going back to Meir Al-Gawabi, one of the problems with me when I was, for this government, when I was writing for Jihad Watch, is that I was writing quite extensively about anti-Islamophobia motion M103. And I'm going to try to explain this very quickly because it relates to everything we're talking about today. A lot of people came out, including most people in the mainstream media, not everybody, and said that M103 wasn't damaging. It wasn't law. It wasn't even a bill. It was just a motion. But motions lead to other action. For instance, there was a follow-up to M103, and this follow-up document that was issued by Melanie Jolie, who was Heritage Minister at the time, followed up with a $23 million, $23 million backed that document. And it was a document that explored Islamophobia and racism according to what the Liberal government saw fit. In it was also monitoring citizens for compliance and training law enforcement to detect online and offline hate. Right now, red light should go on, because what followed eventually? Bill C-10, Bill C-36. So there was something that started this in M103 and it trickled down. Part of this M103 document were organizations which were overseeing and also helping the federal government go after people for exhibiting hatred. And one of the organizations was the National Council of Canadian Muslims, formerly CARECAN. Al-Gawabi was once communications director for the National Council of Canadian Muslims, which is involved in directing the federal government on issues when it comes to detecting hate. Now, what we see going on in the school boards, the National Council of Canadian Muslims was also involved with the Toronto District School Board when it came to defining Islamophobia during Islamic Heritage Month. The original definition talked about hatred and dislike of Islamic culture and politics. That was part of it. B'nai B'rith spoke out. A lot of Jewish groups spoke out and said, well, where does that leave us? Does it mean that if we talk about Iran, it means that we're Islamophobic? So you're seeing a picture here. I'm not attacking Al-Gawabi as a person. I'm just explaining here the organizations that she's been involved with and some of the things that they've been doing. I was fired from that board for being Islamophobic. And the NCCM, it was written in the Toronto Star, was partially involved with my firing. And lo and behold, she's now involved with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, as well as the executive director that Meir was talking about earlier. He was described in a Toronto Sun article as being the spin doctor for the NCCM. And when the Danforth shooter went on a rampage, he was the one that sent forth that letter that helped them craft it, in fact, that explained that this guy suffered from mental illness. So you see, there is a picture. Hate, 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 talk about. But what about hate against the Jewish people? What about the hate that we're seeing in the universities? This didn't start today, and that is a big reason I admire Mayor Weinstein. He is one of the few people that I have seen really attack this at the roots when everybody else was shouting, this is politically incorrect. Well, they didn't find it politically incorrect to say the most heinous things about the Jewish people. And it didn't start today. It was in the Al-Quds rallies, it was on campuses, and now it's brainwashing your children in the school system. So that's for
starters. Let me ask you a question, Christina. Let me ask you a question. Let's say instead of Muhammad Hashim and Amir Al-Gawabi, there would be some white Anglo-Saxon Christian people in their place, in those positions there, and they're decent people. Like I don't know Muhammad Hashim personally, and I don't know Amir Al-Gawabi personally. I have no idea. But what I do know is that there's these associations, and like I said, with the University of Toronto and with the list goes on, and this woman who preached this anti-Semitism in the United States. So, I mean, I hold them, they should be accountable for this. They should make a statement. So if you had some white Anglo-Saxon Christians that were in the same positions as them, and a similar thing happened, but on campus, the association was with, let's say, there was a picture of together with a white supremacist neo-Nazi that somehow made it up to a student union on campus and was preaching similar anti-Semitic garbage. And, so what would be the reaction from the federal government saying, okay, so Mayor Weinstein just showed a picture that these two are buddy-buddy in a picture. What's going on here? This is our federal agency on race relations. It doesn't seem to make sense. Fill me in.
First of all, it would be a media frenzy. Every media would get a hold of that. It would be condemned to the highest degree, and it wouldn't end there. It would most likely end up in court and be dubbed a hate crime. And there will be follow-up. That person will be disgraced to such a degree they won't be able to work anywhere. Now, this fellow, Hatem Bazian, that was mentioned earlier from Berkeley, this man, he doesn't just attack Jews. And I said that earlier, that's bad enough. He goes after everybody. He called for an intifada for America, against America. Right. This is a root problem that we're seeing here. People are now starting to wake up a bit more because the voices opposing it are starting to get a bit louder. But this atrocity that we see happening, it is very one-sided. Jews are being targeted. This is a crisis, I would go so far as to say, that a person can go into a system and start chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Everybody knows what that means. A friend of mine, a Jewish friend of mine, wrote to the Toronto District School Board. And the answer of the Toronto District School Board back to him was, it means different things to different people. No, it does not. It was invented in the Palestinian territories, and it means that Israel must be obliterated from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, period. You look at, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. We talked a little bit about that before.
We have a meme. If our doctor in the studio could show that, go ahead and describe it, Christina.
Yes. we mentioned about the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who worked with Hitler and Eichmann to obliterate the Jews. Now, if you look at this Grand Mufti, he was related to Yasser Arafat. He was an uncle, a great uncle. And Yasser Arafat, his real name is he is an al-Husseini. He changed his name to Yasser Arafat, and he learned a lot under this man. Now, it's very sad because it came out in the news recently that Yad Vashem removed that picture that you see on your screen,
Right.
with Hitler, with this Grand Mufti, because it was politically incorrect. Now, it's rather interesting because I first heard about, in fact, not just heard, but learned about the extent of Arab nationalism and exactly what the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem brought to the territories long before Israel even established a state in 1948. He was the one that was that had the Arab revolt going. They didn't want any Jews there. They talked about eventually the Palestinians, who were really Ottoman South Syrians who were displaced from the Ottoman Empire, when the archaeological evidence proves unequivocally that Jews have every right to that land. There is a ploy. You look at the establishment of the Palestinian Labor Organization by Yasser Arafat, a relative of the Grand Mufti. It says right there in their manifesto that the purpose of the PLO is for the liquidation of Israel. The PA Charter, same thing, for the obliteration of Israel. The Fatah Charter, all of them. This was something that started out even before a Jewish state. Because if you look at the Middle East, it was a lot of Christians. It was conquered through the most violent conquests throughout the Middle East. Egypt, as one example, was 99% Christian, while it's now Islamic. It's an Islamic country, and one of the greatest universities that teaches about Islam is Al-Azhar. That is the foremost university in Islamic studies. This was once a Christian country. It's only Israel that managed to be non-Islamic, and there has been a quest, and it is documented. Don't listen to me. Go and look it up yourself. It is very easy to find. There has been a quest to obliterate the state of Israel from the day of its birth, and there was a quest to stop any Jewish immigration to that region long before Israel was even established. In the day today that we see so much immigration happening, unfortunately, the entire Palestinian resistance from the river to the sea has now dominated our politics. It has dominated our school systems, and we need to be very concerned, particularly considering what they're out for, the entire insurgents, the jihad against Israel, but not only against Jews. There's a genocide going on in Africa against Christians that nobody pays attention to. Yeah. The kind of heinous human rights abuses. Where is the liberal government to talk about these issues, or Black Lives Matter, or these Palestinian networks when it comes to human rights? They keep attacking the Jewish people when Muslims live there. Palestinians have told me in a cab in Israel that they hate the Palestinian Authority. They love the Israeli government because they allow them to work. They allow them freedoms that their own Palestinian people won't allow them. And don't think they don't set up their own checkpoints. They just tell you not to take pictures. I've witnessed it. So people need to get on their computers, do their research, and ask hard questions, because at the end of the day, every good person out there is being threatened by this kind of human rights abuse and attack on the Jewish people that we see happening today.
Let me just add a little bit also. I don't want people to forget this also. There are churches in Canada that are being set on fire, being attacked. That's going on as well. And the progressive left, they think it's wonderful. So it's that culture that we're up against. We have Ron East that wants to join us. He's here, wants to add in, ask some questions to Christina as well. So let's bring Ron onto the show.
Hi, everybody. Excellent. Thank you, Meir. Thank you. Christine, it's a pleasure to be on the show with you, just sitting back and just listening to you, the history, the education, the knowledge that you have. I wish more people would take the time to learn like you have and to be as educated as you have about it. I always say to
Let me, Brian, for
Meir,
1 second, just introduce Ron. Sorry, because we didn't know Ron was going to be with us, and everybody else got this beautiful flowery introduction.
that's okay.
That, we can't forget that Ron is the editor, the founder of the JCA. So while I have a moment of sponsorship time, subscribe to it. It'll be in your mailbox every day. Just get an email. This is today's issue, by the way, of all the things they talk about, and basically they are the voice for Judaism in not only locally but nationally, internationally. And I know because I know some of the writers who've actually submitted articles to this great journal. So Ron, without any further ado, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but back to you.
Oh, that's perfect. You saw the middle picture there was the Mufti with Hitler. We covered that quite a bit. We find that politics sometimes, plays the game of covering up things. And just like you explained about Yad Vashem, the picture used to be very prominent in Yad Vashem. Everybody could see it. Nowadays, you can't even find it in Yad Vashem anymore because it's politically not correct for whatever reason. One thing I want to ask Christina, and as I'm listening to her, there's a big lobby behind, big push, a big lobby behind these things. When I was speaking to Meir about the Toronto District School Board and what happens there, it's not just an incident of the school board or an incident that's done in isolation or in silos. This is a very well-oiled machine, and this old machine is very well connected. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about her experience with this machine and how this machine operates. It's from the top down, but it's also from side to side, it seems like, and everybody's somehow interconnected, just like Mary showed. So, Christina, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
I don't think people realize just how far up this goes. And I'll give you just one single example that emerged the past week, that indicates just how far up the chain it goes. There was a meeting at the UN. 129 nations ruled that the Temple Mount must only be explained, must only be described in terms of Islam. It is considered Muslim domain, not Jewish, Muslim domain. So it must only be referred to that way. That tells you a lot. The United Nations is no longer the United Nations of what we saw right after the League of Nations. And this is how far up the chain this goes. A lot of people don't realize that in 1990, the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights replaced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for Muslim countries, for the OIC. The Cairo Declaration of Human Rights declares Sharia law as the only law. If anybody knows about Sharia law, it is the highest law for Muslims. There is no higher law. It is divine. It comes from God. It is immutable. This trumped for these nations the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So right there, we're seeing a problem. And this was accepted by the United Nations. If you continue to follow the United Nations, more and more, the United Nations pledge to work closer and closer with the OIC till it's become a virtual mouthpiece of the OIC. The atrocities that are happening in Pakistan, the blasphemy laws that are really not blasphemy laws at all, they're really witch hunts against anybody who criticizes Islam, particularly against Christians. But this leader of Pakistan, Khan, has taken it right up to the UN to try to declare, in fact, he can't criminalize it as such to every democratic nation, but that is the intent. He has already succeeded in getting the UN to declare it as something you don't, as a no-go zone, if you will, something you do not touch. Islamophobia has been something that has been adopted internationally, and one does not understand the meaning of Islamophobia. Most people do not. It is not just anti-Muslim bigotry. It is not that. If it was just anti-Muslim bigotry, then what about the 12 million Muslims who were murdered by Muslims since 1948? If that isn't bigotry because they weren't considered Muslim enough, what about them? What about Muslims killing Muslims? Islamophobia also refers to criticisms and insults to Islam. And we saw in that Toronto District School Board definition about the hatred of Islam in politics, it is wrapped into political Islam. It goes right up the chain to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, who has been working with the UN, working with nations, and that has trickled down to various governments. Not every government is into that to that degree, but different governments, as we all know, are more inclined to follow it. We saw Canada break with tradition and go with the pro-Palestinian cause in at the United Nations when it came to the resolutions against Israel and the pro-Palestinian resolutions. And at the same time, we still see criticisms about Canada being too Jewish. There will be no satisfaction until the West becomes completely against Israel and openly declares it, and openly declares the goal of a one-state solution. And as obscene as that sounds, if you go and look at the US, at this Congresswoman Tlaib, Rashida Tlaib, before she won her position as Congresswoman, she was all over the place getting donations from the mainstream Democrat following, and she was around preaching the two-state solution, which is a sham, by the way, because they've always aimed for a one-state solution. But nonetheless, she was everywhere talking about a two-state solution. But after she won, she went right ahead endorsing a one-state solution. And many media reported this, mainstream media. Why did she do this flip-flop from a two-state solution to a one-state solution? So we see this right up to the chain to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and other nations that are virtually anti-Semitic. Don't accept a pat on the back. Oh, we're not anti-Semitic. We're going to have some little measly, cheap summit against anti-Semitism while we spread the red carpet for Islamophobia. This is what they're doing, folks, making it look like they're not anti-Semitic. But where is the government when it comes to condemning what's going on in the Toronto District School Board, when it comes to the real discrimination that we're seeing against Jews? When you look at the definition of anti-Semitism as put forth by the International Holocaust Memorial, I think it's an association, when you look at that, it talks about the attack of the state of Israel. And it doesn't mean that you can't criticize any particular country, but when you start attacking Zionism, which simply means the Jewish right to their homeland, that is anti-Semitic. There is a line that you just don't cross. It's not about free speech. It's about incitement to obliterate a nation. It's about hatred and incitement to violence. We have seen protests that have, particularly after Operation Guardian of the Walls in May, where Israel had to defend itself against Hamas rocket fire, there were tens of thousands of people showing up to support pro-Palestinian protests against the state of Israel. Many of them were becoming violent and vulgar. This is something that we should have zero tolerance against in Canada. But we have a government that sees criticism of Islam as being racist, while incitement to violence against Jews, sadly to say, it's being too much ignored under a banner of anti-racism.
So if I
Well,
can
what
follow
seems
up then,
to happen- exactly. And so what seems to happen is that, and when you speak up against this anti-Semitism, like what is going on with the Jewish trustee at the TDSB, you get labeled an Islamophobe, and they're going to have a meeting this Wednesday at 4:00 Eastern Standard Time at the Toronto District School Board. It's going to be a virtual meeting where they're going to come up with a plan. They're going to discuss how to sanction the Jewish trustee. This is outrageous, and we have to be on top of this, and we have to condemn it, and we have to expose those who are involved with that to promote that type of anti-Semitism sanctioned by the TDSB with all the connections. We have to get all the connections.
Meir, I'm going to let your other guests speak, but there's one thing I'm hoping that people will really listen to and understand here. Nadia Murad, many of you have read her story.
Right.
She was a victim of ISIS, a Yazidi sex slave. What she went through was horrific. I mean, one cannot possibly imagine. You've got people on the far left that talks rights. What about her rights? Well, she managed to, hooray for her. She needs to be applauded and supported. So the Toronto District School Board, when it was doing some book club event and trying to promote education and learning, they were supposed to have her as a guest and promote her book about surviving as a Yazidi sex slave, ISIS. Would you believe the Toronto District School Board did not allow it, shut her down, banned her work, because they were afraid that it would cause Islamophobia? If that doesn't say it all,
Yeah.
Nothing else does. I was kicked out of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation for talking about people like Nadia Murad and talking about the attack against the state of Israel. Now they're going to be afraid that this victim of ISIS as a sex slave is going to cause Islamophobia. What could one now expect? Why are people not lobbying our government to work against this kind of hatred that we see spreading against Jews and against everything righteous and really related to human rights? And I want to make one thing clear here. Meir, and there's nobody here that is against Muslims or against Muslim people.
Right.
No. Discrimination is ugly, and it goes on between a lot of different groups. It is ugly and it needs to be fought. But we are seeing a targeting of the Jewish people and a shutting down of speech that is very important for the protection of victims in the name of human rights.
100%. Look, as a child of Holocaust survivors, I can tell you this. I feel we're in the 1930s. One difference. We have a state of Israel and we have a Jewish army in the state of Israel, and we have the means to really say never again. Not only that, but there's a lot of Israelis who have moved to North America for money reasons. At one time, the Israeli economy wasn't anything like it is today. So, and there's a lot of Israelis moving back to Israel who have moved out. But when I say that there's Israelis who have moved into other countries as well, these Israelis have gone through the IDF. And when push comes to shove, we're not going to put up with it. We know how to fight back. And although it feels like the anti-Semitism was so familiar from back then, from Nazi Germany, how they started, and in Europe, it just spread, and what emerged from that. And we lost 6 million. I don't have grandparents because of that. But the Jewish people are different today. And we fight, and we're not afraid. We're not afraid, and we fight. And it will take some spark to lift the spirits. There's a lot going on. There was an incident that just happened it's Hanukkah right now. Happy Hanukkah to everyone watching the show. This is the last night. But there was an incident in London, England, that a Chabad synagogue took some of their congregants on a bus to downtown London, England to light the menorah, and they were attacked. And we have a video on that. They were attacked by Muslims. By people who identify as Muslims, and it was vicious. This is happening throughout the world. To light Hanukkah candles in different cities throughout the world, that they have to be targeted for attack because they're Jewish and they support Israel. Enough of that. But again, we're not backing down. So I'm hoping that our doctor in the studio has that video.
Meir, today you don't have to be a supporter of Israel to be attacked as a Jew. You just simply have to be a Jew, just to disguise, and before we put the video on, if you don't mind, when we come back, I'd love to hear Christina's opinion or her knowledge on this. We're talking a lot about how the Jewish people, us, we're like the canary in the coal mine. First they come for the Jews, then they come for everybody else. Meir, you were with me in the Al-Quds Day there, where there was a person at Al-Quds Day who came right out and said, Sharia law is going to rule this country one day, whether you like it or not. Get used to it. And my question to Christina, where does she identify the core problem? Where did this all start? Because if we don't identify how it started and we don't identify how it leaked, then we can't figure out how to stop this leak from happening. And we're talking a lot about the Jewish community, but we know that we're just the beginning. How do we bring together, and this is what I want to find from Christine, how do we bring together the other people, the non-Jewish people who are just as threatened as our Jewish community? How do we alert them? How do we bring that alert beyond, our own community? How do we get it to your community, to other communities, and raise an alarm bell that, today it's the Jews, and Zionism is just a mask for anti-Semitism. But when they're done with us, they're going to move to the next people. It's going to be the LGBTQ community. It's going to be, whichever community they find to be the next weak community. and how do we overcome that as a country, I guess, together is my question for you.
It's education, and you have to be loud about it. I'm not saying vulgar. If you notice on the pro-Palestinian protests, they've become vulgar. But if you look at how the movement started out, it was quite insidious. It was quiet. It starts to get louder and louder as they go. But I am not by any stretch saying that you get to that point of vulgarity and violence, but you have to let your voice be heard. Meir's been doing it for some time. And I do have to say that there are a lot of Christians that do support Israel. The International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem has over 90 offices worldwide. There's a branch in Canada that I'm a consultant with. They're very supportive of the state of Israel, of Jewish people, and are concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism. You do find it. I wish I could say it was more prominent, because it needs to be. Because when you look at the World Council of Churches, and this is an example that we see going on about how it reaches the average person out there. And this kind of, it kills two birds with one stone. It answers your question about what we can do, because if you learn by example of what, sad to say, what they've done in terms of marketing, their propaganda, this is more of what we need to be doing. So from that point of view, you could see it. And on the other end, we see the negativity, unfortunately, that it's winning people. The World Council of Churches. And I know that the Palestinian Authority, they scream for more and more funds because they talk about all these poor refugees, and that's all they show the world. They don't show the world about all the money they're paying for slaying Israelis. That fund is very expensive to pay people to kill Israelis, to pay the martyrs, and also to build the most extravagant embassies and consulates all over the world. That is what the Palestinian Authority has done while begging hand in hand for money. So they've done a marketing campaign of victimhood. This is not the Jewish way, but education is the Jewish way. We need to start telling them, like what we're doing today, why do you not care? What do you think is going to happen? For instance, look at what's going on with the Christians in Africa. And in fact, not just Africa, in the Middle East. And there's someone here that wrote that the UN, I'm not seeing it anymore, but they did write up that the UN needs to be investigating what's happening with Christians and Hindus in Pakistan. The UN knows exactly what's happening with Christians and Hindus in Pakistan, but they don't care. The problem is we need to start embarrassing people. We need to start going to the media, start sending letters to politicians and to the media, because they are on the front line of information. If the information is not getting out there, who's going to tell the people? The people read what they see on the headlines. If they're starting to see critical race theory everywhere that only looks at one side, and they parade a certain view of humanity, of Zionism, calling Zionism something evil when it just strictly means the right of Jewish people to have their tiny homeland, if that is the kind of a garbage we're seeing in the newspapers, that is what people are learning. That the poor Palestinians are victims. They put the children there with Operation Guardian of the Walls. They parade the children. They don't parade the Jewish children that are terrified when they hear those sirens, or the Jewish children getting murdered by Palestinian jihadists. So we need to start lobbying the media more, holding politicians accountable and getting information out there. We discuss it among ourselves, but there needs to be activism that goes and holds the media accountable as well, because people are afraid. Well, if I say this, I'm going to look Islamophobic. If you know that you are a person that loves everyone in terms of humanity, and you have nothing against Muslims because they're Muslims, and you have everything like you should against jihadists, why are you afraid of being called Islamophobic? If you know that you're not a bigot against Muslims, stop being afraid of being called a lie.
Right.
If it's a big lie, stop being afraid. They will call you Islamophobic just for, in fact, if you're a Yazidi sex slave, a former Yazidi sex slave that wants to talk about your experience, they're going to call you Islamophobic. Stop being afraid. Go out there, tell the truth, and tell it with kindness. But tell the truth and stop being afraid. That is the biggest advice I can possibly give at this stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah.
Okay, so we have this video.
Let's just show what happens to some fun teenagers just going out in London. And just for the audience who doesn't know, this isn't just a hidden away little part of London. This is a big major shopping area. There's people all over the place. That's important. And the bus that they're on is a chartered private bus. It's not a public bus. So I'll show a couple of videos because they're pretty much going viral because people just really are finally seeing that some Jewish kids for Hanukkah can't even go out and sing and dance without being harassed. Yeah, they don't look too threatening to me.
They will call that provocative.
Okay, so I'm gonna go and while you talk a little bit, I'll find you the clip of the actual assaulting the attack. So keep chatting while I search for that one.
You know, I saw people mentioning about that video was provocative, that they were being provocative, like being out there and celebrating Hanukkah. Somehow they brought it upon themselves. It's like the old analogy that a woman who walks outside with clothes that might be deemed, a little bit too short, she's calling upon herself to be abused by men. It's this ridiculous logic.
So what I'm trying to show is you can actually see their faces. I mean, how hard is it going to be for somebody to identify these people who are proudly showing their faces? They know there are cameras around. And there's so many more videos, but there's not. But there's one of the guys who's throwing things and yelling obscenities to some Jewish teenagers. So again, it's not like they're doing this in some quiet, dark alley. This is in full public, and people around, they're just shopping. They don't care. And the sad reality is, for me, this is so reminiscent of 1930 Germany when, well, first they'd harass a Jew, then they wouldn't buy stuff at their store, or they wouldn't let them join the club. And as today's progressive Jews, the Reform Jews in Germany said, oh, I know, if I'm just a good German citizen first, I'm going to be okay. Well, I guess we just never learn. So anyway, guys, back to y'all.
Gary, they do it outside in public, like, because there's no consequences to it. Mayor can tell you about the consequences from what happened in Toronto on May 15th. I can tell you about the consequence of what happened here in Winnipeg on May 15th. We had our flags burnt. We were physically assaulted. We were threatened to be stabbed on the streets. I was told my wife and my daughter were going to be raped. And the police have done nothing. Here we're sitting now in December coming into 2022, and the police have done absolutely zero to address any of that. They've got the pictures. They know who the people are. They can find them if they choose to, if they wanted to, if there was a will there. But there's no will there. That's why they're out in the open doing what they're doing. They know that there is zero consequence to their actions. And until, somebody dies, and that's what I tell my wife and my kids all the time, until somebody dies, until something horrific is going to happen, you're going to continue seeing these kind of incidents around the world because there is zero consequence to it because it's being done to Jews.
Well, people have died, and there's no consequences.
Even more horrific.
Right. 100%. 100%. We had
just one other thing, Meir, just yes. Because we have it. We also, because there's so much happened. So there's an incident in Israel recently where somebody with a knife just started stabbing people. Well, I don't know if our audience has an opportunity to be on Twitter or Instagram. They're accusing the Israelis of murdering a Palestinian boy. And there's even a few who are saying he was obviously acting in self-defense. And then 3 Israelis, murdered him. So I'm going to show that video if that's okay.
Yes.
Because if somebody hasn't seen it, I mean,
it happened today.
Is just mind-boggling to me. I mean, you can see this. They're just walking along. He's just strolling along, minding his own business.
You could even see he looked back to see the guy to judge how far away from him he is.
There's nobody as a threat. And once again, similar to the teenagers attacked on the bus, there's people around. I mean, he's not hiding. He's not sneaking up at somebody in his house. He's just in full, because he knows the consequences are going to be, he'll be a martyr and his family will get paid, or he'll go to jail and he'll get 3 meals a day, unless he wants to fast, and not really fast, so he can put on some weight. Now, is there any more clear, obvious that he is the attacker? I mean, it's the memes that have gone around saying that they murdered a harmless Palestinian youth.
Stabbed him. Yeah.
Then he goes and tries to stab the Israeli defense or the police, whoever's there. And here he goes, stabbing again. I mean, if you don't want to get shot, don't go around stabbing people. It's really that simple. You know, everybody's going to intellectualize it, that, you know, it was his stress or his poverty or Hamas. It doesn't matter what it is. Here's the deal in Israel. If you don't want to get shot dead, then don't go around stabbing people. Back to you.
Gary, if you rewind the video to the beginning, you know, one of the fallacies that people are trying to say is that he was extrajudicially, you know, murdered. But if you go to the beginning, you can see how many Palestinian or Arab Israelis are walking around right on the right-hand side there. Nobody's opening fire on them. Nobody's usually killing them. Nobody's attacking them. The police don't even care about them. You can tell the only reason it's happening is because this guy is stabbing, you know, a poor Israeli, you know, who's just walking down the street. And yet, you know, but this is what we're fighting up against. You know, it's people then who say, you know, this was self-defense and this was, you know, extrajudicial killing and they shot him when he was down. People don't understand the full story. They don't understand why you would want to neutralize somebody like this. How many times in the past has somebody who stabbed somebody end up having a suicide bomb on them and exploded themselves last minute?
Exactly.
You know, that's why the police have to do what they're doing to neutralize him, to ensure that everybody around there, including the other Arabs who are walking around, are safe from this man who just tried to kill an Israeli. You know,
and if he's not dead and you approach him with his last strength, he's going to stab you. I mean, they can't just back away and just leave him there forever. I mean, it is. I think that we can summarize it, and somehow the whole world believes that all they want, the Arabs, the Muslims, the Palestinians, they just want a little bit of land. I mean, did they not get it? I mean, this what they want. Here's Israel, right? Here's, you know, 40 Arab countries, 7 Islamo-fascist theocracies. But they, if we just give them a little bit of land, it's going to be okay.
My God.
Okay, back to you guys. And
we had, okay, so Gary did a brief, short interview with Thane Rosenbaum because he was going to be joining us, but then something came up, so he did a taping with him earlier. Maybe we could show a little bit of Thane because he had some great insight also. Just a shame that he
coming right up.
Right. Yep, just coming up.
Just reading some of the comments on the side there, and it's pretty interesting.
Yes, active. A lot of comments.
Yeah.
Let me preface this a little with all you saying. You'll recall I introduced Stan at the beginning. He's a distinguished professor. He used to actually teach at NYU, and when he's live sometime, you could tell him about his experience there of a university which has an incredibly large Jewish student body, yet anti-Semitism is just everywhere in it. So I just basically, Thane was going to be with us this evening and said he's going to address the concept of this increased Islamo-fascist hatred and anti-Semitism on college campuses. So here's Thane.
Right.
Just Thane. So we have Thane Rosenbaum with us, who you saw in our introduction today. We gave him his glowing reviews as a professor, an attorney, an all-around expert on everything we're talking about tonight, which mostly is this surge of anti-Semitism on college campuses. We know it's nothing new. It's been happening all over California campuses for 25 years now. Thane, so we just like your opinion, commentary, and if there is a solution to this worsening BDS enforcement on college campuses. Thane, take it away.
Well, Gary, I would say this is one of those topics that I would prefer not to be an expert on, because it's a very painful topic. The reason, among other reasons, it's painful is that for many years, most people in the general public, and certainly Jews, whether they live in Canada or the United States, didn't even know this was going on. This is what plagued the children and grandchildren of Jews in Canada and the United States. But most people were not aware of how much incredible hostility is directed toward Israel, and how much punishment is directed toward Jews that don't openly denounce Israel. This idea, I think most people don't even believe that it's happening. And I think one of the great virtues of today's program is that you're making it clear and unmistakable that this is on campus, and it crosses states and countries. We're seeing this all over North America. This has been going on for several decades, but we're only now, it's coming to light, in part because it's been adopted by many of the people who once deployed these tactics, who have now entered the private sphere, whether it's newspapers, publishing, museums, the corporate suite. So we're seeing the same kind of pro-BDS, anti-Semitic, disguised as anti-Zionistic behavior. We're seeing it in the public sphere. But it has been going on for a long time, and there were people like me who always believed naively that it was confined to the university. And thank God it dies at the university, and then students graduate and they grow up and they read more thoroughly, and they're not as indoctrinated by their professors, and they develop their own independent thinking. But that's not what's happened. What's happened instead, that it is infected and penetrated the private sector, and what you're seeing on campus, you're seeing now in everyday life. Again, whether it's in museums, publishing, newspapers, journalism, broadcast journalism, you're seeing it everywhere. One of the things that's interesting that's on campus that I think most people don't realize is that it's not just that it's disguising anti-Semitism and as anti-Semitism. It's worse than that. It's essentially saying to Jews, you have to prove to us that you are a religion and not a people, that you are not a nation. The only nation you are is the United States or Canada. You don't belong to another nation. We will respect you and your religion, but you have to step outside of your religion and denounce Israel as a human rights violator supreme and as a colonialist settler enterprise. And unless you do it openly, publicly, we won't let you run for student government. We won't allow you to eat kosher food. We will boycott anything and everything unless Jews openly declare their hatred of Israel and their willingness to boycott Israel and divest from Israel.
I think we'll bring Thane back a little bit later when he addresses the specifics of my feeling that really we're witnessing deja vu of 1930s. So let's get you guys back on the screen, and maybe near the end of the show, I'll run the rest of Thane's segment.
Yep.
You know, I wonder how much of this is actually, a resurgence of the 1930s as the 1930s were, versus this being an issue of demography and immigration, as immigration changes and as that shifts, because, this is not in my opinion anyway, a right wing or a right extremist issue here. This new form of anti-Semitism isn't coming from my side, from what I see, from what I'm fighting every day, from what I'm experiencing. It's not coming from neo-Nazis and white supremacists. It's coming from organizations that call themselves human rights organizations, like Canadian Defenders for Human Rights, organizations like Independent Jewish Voices, like If Not Now. All these, organizations on the outside seem very gentle and harmless, and yet those are the organizations that are causing the most of the harm. In this constant fight. Who's in the lead in Canada? Fighting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. It's not a Muslim organization. It's not a pro-Palestinian organization. It's the Independent Jewish Voices. It's an organization that considers itself to be Jewish. The concerns.
Ron, hang.
Yeah,
I know what you're saying. But this is, and there is demography at stake here. That with greater in the Islamic world, as Christina pointed out, with the votes and the organization of Islamic states, how they are with their anti-Semitism and their voting in the UN and what they're trying to promote, and that these Islamic organizations in North America, like CARE and others, what they promote and who they promote and what they justify, and just like that speaker that we had on the video earlier, Zara Belil, the anti-Semitic garbage that she says, and others who are preaching intifada, they feel strengthened when there's more Islamic immigration from these countries that hate Jews, that preach anti-Semitism, that preach the destruction of Israel. So when you bring in more, you're definitely going to have more anti-Semitism. Now, on the note of these organizations like If Not Now or Independent Jewish Voices or Jewish Voice for Peace or whatever, these are front organizations for Islamic BDS activity
Correct.
slash Hamas PFLP. Because
Correct.
what I saw on May 15th in Toronto at Nathan Phillips Square, it was not a multicultural gathering against Israel. These were Islamic organizations. This was the Islamic community screaming for the end of Israel. And that was it. And there was violence, and it was all tolerated. Everything was anything goes. And unless these Islamic organizations are going to condemn Hamas or the PFLP and other terrorist organizations, in fact, the prominent organization just now in Canada, Islamic organization, called on the Canadian government to take measures against Israel for their recent designation of 6 so-called human rights organizations that the Israeli government are saying, and the defense ministry in Israel are saying, are fronts for the PFLP, the terrorist organizations. The links are there. They say they have ironclad information of fundraising activities for the PFLP and terrorist organizations. Islamic organization here, prominent one, calling on the Canadian government to condemn the Israeli government for those measures, and they're calling these groups human rights organizations. So they feel a lot more strength when there's this Islamic immigration coming here, that there's more people. That
just
that
to finish
doesn't
the
mean
point.
that doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye at all. We have to, and that's what's going on in the school board too, the Toronto District School Board as well. That they're trying to say that when Jewish groups and Jewish individuals are speaking up and speaking out against anti-Semitism and explaining what the IRA definition of anti-Semitism is, that these Islamic organizations are against that and are calling the messaging from the Jewish organizations to be Islamophobic.
I agree. The only point I was trying to make, at the end was that they use these organizations that I mentioned, Independent Jewish Voice, as a clout, as a cover, as an excuse, as a reasoning, as saying, hey, listen, we aren't anti-Semitic. We aren't against Jews. There's this. That's what I'm trying to say. The problem here, is that there's that layer of coverage, from within our own community that allows us to propagate and to deepen and to happen. And that's a concern that I have, because a lot of time that's where they go to. That's a de facto place they go to. Something happens. Who do they bring to a news conference? If not now, to stand in behind them, or the Independent Jewish Voices, those types of things. They're trying to use them as a cover and as an excuse. They continue to do whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish. And that's an issue that we need to also address. It can't be blind to, but it's part and parcel of the whole big picture.
Let me strengthen that for you. Another level. That Rabbi Korupkin from the Bayit Synagogue in Thornhill, the largest Orthodox synagogue probably in Canada, that he reaps praise on Mohammed Hashem from the Canadian Race Relations Agency. Now, if he has some kind of cooperation or a friendship with Mohammed Hashem, I would expect, actually, that you should be able to pick up the phone anytime you want, if you're really getting along with him, and say, hey, Mohammed Hashem, look, we got this issue. There's this girl who says she's a student leader for the union at University of Toronto, who says she's also very involved with the organization that you're very involved with. You're one of the leaders there, the Urban Alliance of Canada on Race Relations. Can you condemn her for this anti-Semitism that she's been founded? But that is not going on. He has been silent on that. So these so-called dialogue that's going on between Islamic leaders and Jewish leaders, if the Jewish leaders all of a sudden they're silent and they don't have it in them to even ask these Islamic leaders when the associations are very spelled out and clear, there's a major problem right from the top over there.
So then you got to ask yourself and go, why is that? Why are the Jewish leadership that have this connection so afraid to speak up? What are the ramifications that they're so afraid of that they'd rather stay silent? And by staying silent, allowing this to become a regular, thing that happens versus standing up. What is it? And that's what I'm trying to always get to. What is it that makes that rabbi not pick up the phone?
Right.
What makes him decide to go? That his own community safety, is not as important to him as his relationship or as the perceived relationship or the fallout or whatever the case might be that he would have from calling out or speaking out against somebody. And it goes back to what Christine said before, and the word she used was fear. And that's the problem here. They use fear. They're going to sue you. They're going to take you to court. They're going to get you fired from work. They're going to ostracize you. They're going to call you out, social media, whatever. And people are afraid. People are afraid for their own reputations. People are afraid. So they don't want to get involved. And that's the problem. People don't want to get involved. And by the time they get involved, a lot of time it's too late. And, and that's the alarm I try to raise to people all the time. If you're going to wait on the sidelines and wait for everybody else to do the work, one day you're going to find that it's too late for you to jump into the game. You got to jump into the game. We're all feeling uncomfortable. You cannot tell me there's a Jew out there in North America today in 2021 that does not feel uncomfortable. I don't care if you're progressive or if you're not progressive. I don't care if you're pro-Israel or anti-Israel. As a Jew, you cannot feel comfortable today in 2021, 2022, walking in the streets of North America or Europe for that matter. And the question to our leadership is, why is that? And what have you done to make sure this doesn't happen? And if you've done nothing, shame on you. And what do we need to do now to make sure we put a stop to this? Because before too long, it'll be too far gone. You're mentioning 1930s. Well, the jump from between 1930s and the concentration camps wasn't too long.
Right.
It wasn't a huge jump. It didn't take too many years for that to happen. So if we're already in the 1930s, man, the alarm is already there. The house is burning. We need to get out. We need to put it out. And what I find is you and I put it out, Christine puts it out, but where's our leadership, our own leadership, our community leadership, the people that we're supposed to look up to and say, guide me, lead me, I want to follow you, I want to feel protected, I want to feel safe. Where are my parents within my own community? If I'm a child of my community, where are my guardians? Where are my parents? You're leaving me alone. I'm an orphan.
Right.
That's what I am. I'm an orphan within my own community. And it's just shocking.
Well put. Wow.
Sorry, but that's the way.
Christina, what could you add to that?
I think you did just perfect. And I think it's very important for people to realize being quiet will not make it go away. Just being quiet, it just doesn't work. And I like how you mentioned about the letters. Send letters out to these people and put them up on your websites that this person was notified and we are now waiting to hear from them, because the Canadian Race Relations Foundation vows to fight hate. So we are putting you on alert that we are waiting. We are waiting to hear from you, and we're putting you on alert that people know about this. They know that a letter has gone in and they're waiting for your reply. This is something that Jewish groups need to be doing. Now, I see some doing it, but there needs to be a lot more. I know that there are a lot of Jewish people, just like what you said, they think if they just stay quiet, live their life, mind their business, why would anybody hate us? Well, look what happened in the Holocaust. Bullies prosper when they are allowed to. This isn't quietness, and being nice about it is not going to stop them. Activism will start to embarrass people, embarrass politicians and media, and that's when you'll start seeing some action. They will get away with whatever they feel they can get away with. But today, there are a lot of Jewish supporters out there, and we have to remember, because we're not hearing about these issues in mainstream media, it doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of support. They're hiding that kind of support from people as well. A lot is being hidden. Israel and the Jews have a lot of support today. I truly believe that. I know a lot of visible minorities that ask the question, what's the problem? I mean, if you look at the entire Middle East, it was all gained by conquest, violent conquest. It's this little tiny piece of land. What's the problem? I've seen a lot of visible minorities and heard them say this, but this is not the kind of thing you're hearing in the news. They only publicize one voice, and they try to turn minorities against whites and vice versa. I'm a visible minority mixed with every race in pretty even proportions, and I was kicked out of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation because I didn't agree with some of what the government was bringing down. I saw this, and I remember saying at the time, and this was in 2017 when I was fired, I was saying, I'm on the front line of this battle right now, but it's going to start to hit everybody one at a time. It'll start insidiously moving through society, and all of the activists out there, and you look at a person like Robert Spencer, who is always under attack. You too, Meir, once we're going to see a pattern here. Once upon a time, it just may have been you, just may have been Robert. More and more, I got fired. We're starting to see it hit regular, everyday citizens for even saying something like all lives matter. Well, if you claim to believe in a God, you will realize that all lives do matter. And just because, so in other words, what they're saying is that the genocide that's happening in Africa with ISIS taking out the Christians, it's blacks killing blacks, so that doesn't matter. How racist could you be? How racist could you be that you don't even care that black people are getting slaughtered in Africa, are getting slaughtered by blacks in inner cities? How dare you call people racist for calling that out? You're the racist because you don't care about black lives. There is an industry out there that has been contaminated. They have agendas, but they don't care about black lives. They don't care about life, period. They have an agenda, and they have pushed history because they talk about colonialism while ignoring 1400 years of jihad, and they choose what they want. They pick and choose, and they target Jews, they target Christianity, and that is the bottom line. Attack the Jews, attack the Christians, and it's all about white versus everybody else. It's okay for blacks to kill blacks. It's okay. It's okay for Muslims to murder Muslims, and that's okay too. They don't care about human life, period.
100%.
But it's also okay for Muslims to have blacks as slaves. The biggest modern slavery nowadays going on today is by Muslims of blacks. But heaven forbid, we bring that up as a topic.
Again, how racist could you be to not?
Well, I'm being racist right now by suggesting I'm being both Islamophobic apparently and
they're
racist.
They're the racists. They don't care about human life.
But it's the truth, but nobody wants to hear the truth,
So we have one more on a lighter note. We're starting a new campaign. We always start campaigns. We're starting a new campaign as well. We're going to be selecting different BDS leaders and BDS organizations that are known for the new anti-Semitism. And so we're going to be planting trees in Israel in their memory. And I say in their memory because Israel is going to survive. There's no question about it. We're going to survive. We're going to be speaking up. We're going to be doing the right thing. So we're going to be planting trees, preferably along the border of Israel with Gaza, where they're trying to destroy Israel with incendiary balloons and bombs, and plant trees there. So we do have a sample of a plaque already in recognition of. Maybe Ron could describe it right now.
Yeah, this is 100% authentic. We took the opportunity to purchase a tree in memory of food vendors to be planted in Israel on the Gaza border to provide security and comfort to the Israeli residents who are suffering daily from rockets or fires or whatever the case might be from Gaza. So if Gary has the plaque, so everybody can see it's actually official. We've done it. So she's the first recipient. Food Benders is the first recipient of our plaques plant trees, and this is going to be an initiative I think Gary and Meir that hopefully will fundraise for, so that we can plant hundreds and hundreds of trees. And so every hater who wants to hate us, a tree will be there to put its roots into Israel and to ensure that the Jewish people are living there forever.
And everyone who makes a contribution to our organization, Israel Now, go on our website, israelnow.ca, make a contribution, make a donation. A portion of that will go towards this endeavor of planting those trees. And I was already contacted by someone.
And feel free to nominate people.
Plaques that will have plaques there to identify the trees in Israel.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be a worthwhile endeavor. And every single week, we'll come up with another personality who's deserving, or organization deserving of that acknowledgement. We're going to plant trees. We're going to thrive. We're going to exist.
And by the way, if they want their plaque to put up on the wall, they just need to contact us at the show or through the website. Give us the address. We'll be more than willing to send them a copy of their own plaque to put up on their wall, so that they can also appreciate it, and they can send us a picture with it too. Them with the plaque together would be wonderful.
Christina, how do you like that?
I love it. Something positive. It's just great. I'm seeing some comments there. Brilliant idea, man. I love it.
You got to take, when you have lemons, you make lemonade, right? So you got to always find a way to commemorate this. And, I think this is a great way to do it. It's a great initiative. Trees last forever, and they provide protection. They put in their roots, and so people can go there and really see those trees. There it is.
Here we go.
And there you have the official Trees for Israel planted in memory of food vendors. So keep up the good work. Like you said, donate to israelnow.ca, and we'll plant trees and whatever anti-Semites you like the most. We'll just do the anti-Semite of the week, and this will be their reward.
Love it. Absolutely great.
I want to thank everyone for joining us. It's already been about an hour and a half. It's been wonderful. Wonderful. I mean, we're talking about issues, but it's wonderful that we're getting the information out to the public. And that's the whole point of it all. I want to thank Gary, who's in the background helping Christina. Thank you very much. Ron East, thank you. Gary in the background is saying we should have a closing comment from Thane Rosenbaum. And I saw the interview earlier. He had some excellent points. It's going to be pretty short, right to the point.
The nation, and that people and nation has always been the Israelites and Israel, even during the 2,000 years when there wasn't an Israel. Our identification was always next year in Jerusalem. Why do you think we say that? We said that because we always understood our nation to be the Jewish state of Israel. And so this is actually a very clever and cynical tactic that's being deployed against Jews, and especially, I would say, vulnerable Jewish students who come to campus and they want to have friends, and they don't want to fight, and they want to study and go into medical school or law school, and they want to, they don't want to be pressured and castigated and denounced as a pro-Israel sympathizer who therefore believes in the apartheid of Palestinians and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. One remedy here is that our students are woefully inadequate to respond to these charges. Somehow we've allowed them or encouraged them to get high SAT scores, but somehow they get like a C- or D+ in their ability to argue the case and the moral necessity of a Jewish state and its geographic identification, its identity, and again, the identity between Jews as a religion, as Judaism, and Israel as a nation and homeland. And that argument can be dispelled very easily, but our students are woefully inadequate to do so. Our faculty members tremble, Jewish faculty members tremble every day because they want to get tenure and they want to have friends. Everybody wants to have friends. It's nice to have friends. I understand. But when you want friends, what you have is this. You have this sort of unleashing of a unilateral attack against Israel. It is not directed at any other country that are true human rights violators. And these slanders and libels against the Jewish people, that they are colonialists, that they, that there's ethnic cleansing in Israel, that Israeli soldiers are teaching American policemen how to subdue African Americans. These are just vile blood libels, and we are not adequately addressing them. One thought solution is just to make sure that two things. One, our students know how to argue the point. I'm deeply pessimistic how it is so pervasive on campus. I don't know whether students can overcome this. I think the next time you speak to a Jewish faculty member, you should say, do you defend Israel on campus? Are you prepared to do so? Or are you just one of those people who wants to go along with this charade that Israel is the greatest human rights violator in human history? But I think the single most important thing that can and should be done is stop writing checks to universities. Stop! Stop writing checks. Stop! You don't need to do it. Your nephew's not going to get into that school anyway. Forget it. There's other places for him or her to go. This nonsense of people, Jews, who are loyal to their alma maters, but are terrified about picking up the phone and calling the president and saying, I am very distressed about what I'm hearing on campus. When I think of some of these universities, frankly, Oberlin, Vassar, Berkeley, how Jews who graduated from these places, NYU, where I used to be for a number of years, where Jews who graduated from these places are not making their voices known and voting in the proper way for what they want to see happen by simply stop writing checks and making sure that university officials are aware that we're watching you. We see this, what is not even thinly veiled anti-Semitism. We want to call it out for what it is. And we're wondering why, in an era of wokeness and identity politics, Jews are not entitled to their own identity politics. Jews are no longer a marginalized minority. Jews are suddenly a colonialist majority. How did that happen? Because it's totally absurd. And so I think that one thing that I've spoken around the country, and people look at me and they're just puzzled by this, that Jews are writing checks to the very same places that are proponents of anti-Semitic propaganda and anti-Israel propaganda disguised as a human rights issue. And our Jewish students are not ready to respond. And frankly, nor should they be in some ways. It is an unpleasant task to ask of, young students. But it is one way to respond, right? One way to respond is because if faculty is not responding, as we know from university life today, there is a wrong way of thinking and there's a right way of thinking. There's no marketplace of ideas. It's only one way of thinking. And if you stand outside or question those ideas, you're immediately labeled a racist, a homophobe, an Islamophobe. And so it is an unfortunate thing and a terrible burden to ask of students. But I'm not sure that we have a better solution because it's unimaginable, I think, for most people to see how uniform and how pervasive this is throughout every phase of campus. This kind of behavior is tolerated. Anything that is anti-Israel is seen as a human rights issue and not seen for what it is, which is blatant anti-Semitism.
I think one of the things, saying that regarding these students and wanting to be friends with everybody is not learning from history. In 1930 in Germany, when the Jews who were liberal or non-observant, we didn't have a country per se, but we still were a people. And they seemed to feel that, oh, if I'm just a good German first and I'm a Jew next, I'll be okay. Well, they weren't okay. And I don't know if they don't teach history and Holocaust in colleges anymore, if that's become taboo because of BDS. But that's the situation. These times we're living through right now, for me, are too reminiscent of 1930 Germany. You know, when my grandparents narrowly escaped, little universities, the colleges in Germany, the gymnasium, they didn't let Jews be on the sports teams or be on the debate teams. And that is what I think we're headed for if we, meaning us who do speak out, don't do something about it. So any closing comments before we move on to our next guest?
All I would say to that, Gary, is that Jews don't believe that, right? They don't believe what you just said. They say, oh, come on, Gary. The same as Nazi Germany in the early 1930s. Look at the power that Jews have throughout the United States. Look at the influence they have in the Western world. People don't, this is why Jews just simply don't count in the world of identity politics. It's just that Jews themselves simply don't believe what you're saying. You're right. You're absolutely right. The parallels are unmistakable. But they see you as a hysteric, and they say, what Gary Brathman just said to us is like what people say about Trump being Hitler, right? Trump is many things, but I've said this before, whether you like him or not, he's not Hitler, right? He's many things, but that he's not. But we've allowed this casual talk to go on, and the people would respond to you by saying, yeah, it's the same thing, trying to pretend that this is 1933 Germany, that we're on the eve of Kristallnacht. And I think that's, and then the last point I want to make, Gary, is when you said what is being taught in Holocaust classes. Well, let me give you this last anecdote, which is perfect for today's segment of your show, Never Again, which is that at Oberlin University, an African-American history professor said, we should not be teaching the Holocaust at Oberlin because the Holocaust is merely white-on-white crime. It doesn't count. It's white-on-white crime. And I have really nothing else to say other than that anecdote, Gary.
Thank you so much for being with us again. We look forward. Thought we close with this little comment that we're all very familiar with, but I'm not a Jew with trembling knees. No one came to our aid when we were dying in gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it, we fought for it, we died for it. We will stand by our principles, we will defend them, and when necessary, we will die for them again. And the important thing is, again, we've died before throughout history, but we're still around. So, Meir, everybody else in the studio, back to y'all, and I'm out for the evening.
Okay, so closing comments from everyone. Christina, go ahead.
Looking forward to those trees.
Amen.
Israel has a lot of friends today. It is a very different world from back then. So that's something we need to hold on to. And not everything you read in the media is true. There are way more supporters than is given the impression of in the media.
Amen. Ron?
4 quick points, from what Hussein said there. You mentioned that it's hard to ask young people, on university campuses, to take on the fight for Israel. We ask our 18-year-olds in Israel to take up the fight and put their lives on the line for Israel and to fight anti-Semitism. I don't think it's too much to ask of young Jews in North America and universities to take on the cause, to take on the call, and to do what they can in order to ensure the Jews are safe, whether it's university, whether it's in their cities, or whether it's in the state of Israel. Number one. Number 2 point I want to make is you mentioned about 1930s when Gary was mentioning that it's like the 1930s. People would say to him back in return, look at Jews today, the power and influence they have. I'll draw you back to Germany, 1930s, 1920s, and the power and influence the Jews had there too. That didn't stop the Nazis from coming to power. That did not stop, the Holocaust from happening. Another thing he mentioned there was that for professors, they want to have friends. It's nice to have friends. My father always told me with friends like that, who needs enemies? So they need to take that into heart. And last thing I want to say is from the beginning of the show, when they were comparing Islamophobia and saying Islamophobia is Zionism, I'd like to draw attention to the Abraham Accords and all the Arab countries that have signed now peace treaties with Israel. If that's Islamophobia, I'll have it every day. And with that, I end.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when I started, I said the Parsha of the week, Mekates, and Mekates meant Vehi Mekates. It's and a new era began, and I believe this is a new era as well, and I believe we're on the cusp of something unbelievable. When the president of Israel lit the menorah in Hebron at the Cave of the Patriots. That was a historic moment. And more Jews are going up to the Temple Mount. And eventually, we're going to see what started in Hanukkah. The battle didn't end in the original Hanukkah story after they lit the menorah on the Temple Mount and rebuilt the temple. The temple wasn't fully functioning then, but the first act they did of cleansing the Temple Mount was lighting the menorah. I believe we're in a special era, and we want more and more people to wake up and be part of this and speak the truth and never be afraid and never back down. And we'll use every means at our disposal. We have the technology. We'll get the truth out there. We have to get the truth out there. Join us, be part, and also be part of our campaign of planting those trees and exposing the haters. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for everyone watching. Please share this on the various pages and groups that you're part of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Meir.
Thank you, Meir.
I just did want to thank our guests once again and just remind everybody that there are some books available and you can get these on Amazon or wherever else. And please support our guests. Of course, they're doing so much to support us. And Meir, did you want me to play a quick little song, or do we think the time got a little too late? Well, so the little song, of course, you know me, there's no such thing as little anything. So I tell you about a song, first of all. So this is a Jewish partisan song. It's a Yiddish song. It's one of the most powerful songs ever written. And that's not me. I was shocked to find out how many people have covered this song in several languages. It was sung by the Jewish resistance fighters. It was considered the main Yiddish anthems of the Holocaust. It was sung in ghettos, later by Holocaust survivors, Holocaust memorials. So I'm going to play just maybe 20 seconds of 3 or 4 different versions of this song. So there'll be a little delay between each session, but I think it's worth it. All of our listeners, if you don't want to listen to the music, we're pretty much done with the didactic educational portion. This is where the entertainment portion kicks in. So enjoy.
Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Gott schimmeln Leine, verstehen Leute. Kuhn, retten noch unser ausgeweckt Schlag. Das Wetter beugt und unser Trott mir seinen Dog. Kuhn, retten noch unser ausgeweckt Schlag.
Here's the word.
Das Wetter beugt und unser Trott mir
Never say this is the end of the road.
Von grünem
Wherever a drop in our blood falls, our courage will grow anew. Our triumph will come, and our resounding footsteps will proclaim we are here. From the land of palm trees to the far-off land of snow. Again, this can be found online. You could all read these. I'm not going to read the rest to you, but it's a very moving, touching song. And once again, during the darkest of times, we produce music, we produce songs, and we produce a future, regardless of what many people would really like to happen with the entire Jewish population.
von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Plein, mit unser Weg. Und vorgefallen ist dieser Spritz von unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Gure, unser Mut.
I'm going to play one more quick version, then I'm going to let everybody go eat dinner. The one you've been waiting for, Ron.
Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst den letzten Weg. Gott schwimmen bleiben, verstehen Leute. Kommen wird nach unser ausgedrängte Show. Es wird der Point und unser Freund. zwischen fallende Käben, das Lied gesungen mit ner Gannes in die Hand. So never say that you will go on your last way. Through darkened skies may now conceal the blue of day. As the hour that we long for is so near, beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here. 'Cause the hour which we've hungered for is near. Beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here.
Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Israel.
What a show, guys. What a show.